The dust from the stagecoach wheels had barely settled when Clara Thompson stepped onto the wooden sidewalk of Lincoln, New Mexico territory, her whole world reduced to two worn leather bags and a crumpled letter promising employment at the Miller household. July 1878 brought merciless heat that shimmered off the dirt road, and she pressed a handkerchief to her forehead, wondering if she had made the worst mistake of her 22 years by leaving Kansas City after her aunt's death had left her without family or prospects. The town sprawled before her like something from a fever dream, buildings patched together from hope and desperation, men with guns on their hips eyeing her with curiosity that made her skin prickle, and somewhere in the distance, the sharp crack of hammers against wood punctuated the afternoon air. She asked a passing woman where she might find the Miller residence, but the woman's face went pale and she hurried away without answering. Clara's stomach twisted. 3 more people refused to meet her eyes when she inquired, until finally an older gentleman with a weathered face and kind eyes stopped. "The Millers left town 2 weeks back," he said, his voice heavy with something that sounded like pity. "There was trouble with the Dahlan faction, and they figured it best to head back east. I am sorry, miss. You came all this way for nothing." Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The teaching position she had been promised, the room and board, the fresh start, all of it evaporated in an instant. She had $17 to her name, no return ticket, and absolutely nowhere to go. "Is there a boarding house?" she managed to ask, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mrs. Patterson runs 1-2 blocks down, but I will be honest with you, miss. Lincoln is not a safe place for a woman alone right now. There is a range war brewing and people are choosing sides. Blood has already been spilled." She thanked him and made her way to the boarding house, her mind racing through increasingly desperate possibilities. Mrs. Patterson, a stout woman with flour on her apron and suspicion in her eyes, quoted her a price that would drain her funds in less than 2 weeks. "I can pay for 3 nights now," Clara said, lifting her chin, "and I will find work to cover the rest." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "What kind of work can you do?" "I can teach, keep accounts, sew, cook, clean. I am not afraid of honest labor." Teaching positions do not exactly grow on trees out here, and most folks do their own cleaning, but I will ask around. The older woman paused, studying Clara's face. "You look dead on your feet. Get yourself settled, and we will talk more at supper." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the dusty street. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes of despair before straightening her shoulders. She had not survived her parents' deaths from influenza at age 14, had not endured 8 years living with an aunt who resented every bite of food Clara ate, had not scraped together enough money through endless sewing work to make this journey, only to give up now. She washed her face, changed into a fresh dress despite the heat, and went downstairs to help Mrs. Patterson with supper preparations. If she was going to find work in this town, she needed to make herself indispensable, starting immediately. The dining room filled with boarders as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. There were 2 shopkeepers, a lawyer, a surveyor, and a cowboy who introduced himself as Pete Richards, but went silent when Mrs. Patterson shot him a warning look. Clara served food and listened to the conversation swirling around her, picking up names and tensions. John Tunstall, recently murdered. Alexander McSween, whose store had become a fortress. The house, which seemed to refer to some powerful business interest. The regulators, young guns with more courage than sense. "What Lincoln needs," the lawyer was saying, "is people willing to build something that lasts instead of tearing everything down. but that takes a different kind of courage than fast guns. After the meal, Clara helped with the dishes, and Mrs. Patterson finally spoke what had clearly been on her mind. "That cowboy, Pete Richards, he was trying to catch your eye all evening." "I noticed," Clara said carefully. "He works a small spread about 5 miles west of here. Inherited it from his uncle last year. He is not involved in the range war, keeps to himself mostly, and from what I hear, he is trying to build the place up proper. He is 26, never married, and decent enough as men go." Mrs. Patterson handed Clara a plate to dry. "He asked if you might be willing to meet with him tomorrow morning. Said he has a proposition that might interest someone looking for work." Clara's hands stilled. "What kind of proposition?" "The respectable kind, I would wager. Pete is not the type to play games." "If he says he has work, he means honest work." "Then yes, I will meet with him." The next morning, Pete Richards arrived at the boarding house wearing clean clothes and holding his hat in his hands like it might fly away. He was taller than Clara had noticed at dinner, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of summer grass. His hands bore the calluses of hard work, and when he spoke, his voice carried the slow, careful cadence of a man who thought before he talked. "Miss Thompson, I appreciate you agreeing to see me. I know this is unusual, and you have every right to tell me to go to blazes, but I am going to speak plain because I do not have time for pretty words." He met her eyes directly. "I am trying to build a ranch that will last, something I can be proud of. I have cattle, good grazing land, and a water source that does not run dry. What I do not have is help, and I do not have a house worth calling one. I have been living in a line shack barely big enough to turn around in while I put every spare moment into building a proper home." Clara waited, her heart beating faster. "I heard you lost your teaching position through no fault of your own, and I heard you can cook and manage a household. I need someone who can do those things. I need someone who can help make my place a real home instead of just a collection of buildings and livestock." He took a breath. "I am offering you employment as a housekeeper, with separate quarters, respectable wages, and my word that I will conduct myself as a gentleman. Mrs. Patterson has agreed to act as a reference for both of us, and you would be free to leave at any time if the arrangement does not suit you. You want to hire me to keep house at her ranch 5 miles from town, where I would be the only woman," Clara said slowly. "Yes, I know how it sounds, but I am asking you to take a chance on me being an honest man who needs honest help. You would have your own space in the new house once it is finished. Until then, I would continue staying in the line shack while you took the small cabin I have been using for storage. It is not much, but it has 4 walls and a roof, and I would make sure it was cleaned out and fitted proper before you set foot in it." Clara studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives. She saw only exhaustion and hope in equal measure. "Why me? You do not know me, Mrs. Patterson spoke well of you, said you worked without being asked, did not complain, and treated people with respect. That tells me more than a dozen fancy references." Pete turned his hat in his hands. "Look, I will be honest with you about something else. I am building this place because I want a life that matters, a legacy that outlasts me. Eventually, I hope to have a family. But right now, I just need help and you need work. Maybe we can help each other out of our respective troubles." There was something in his straightforwardness that appealed to Clara. No false promises, no flowery language, just honest need meeting honest need. "I want to see the place before I decide," she said. Relief flooded his face. "Of course. I brought a wagon. We can go right now if you are willing." The ride west revealed landscape that stole Clara's breath, despite the circumstances. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touching a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. The land rolled in shades of gold and green, dotted with juniper and piñon. Pete pointed out landmarks as they traveled, his voice taking on a different quality when he talked about the land. That ridge line there, that is the northern boundary of my property. I have 320 acres total, with a creek that runs year-round through the western section. The previous owner, my uncle, he let the place run down after his wife died. He lost heart for it. But the bones are good. The land is good. It just needs someone willing to put in the work. They crested a rise, and Clara saw the ranch spread before them. Pete had not exaggerated about the house he was building. It sat on a gentle slope with a view that seemed to stretch forever, its frame reaching toward the sky like a promise. The structure was perhaps halfway complete, with walls rising and the skeleton of a roof beginning to take shape. Near it sat a small cabin that leaned slightly to one side, and further down the slope, an even smaller lined shack that looked like a strong wind might carry it off. The big house will have 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen, a parlor, and a dining room, Pete said, and Clara heard pride mixed with uncertainty in his voice. I have been working on it every spare minute I can find, but between the cattle, the regular ranch work, and trying to keep myself fed, progress has been slower than I would like. He helped her down from the wagon, and Clara walked toward the unfinished house with her heart in her throat. Up close, she could see the care he had taken with it. The wood was good quality, the joints clean and tight, the foundation solid. This was not the work of a man slapping together a shelter. This was the work of someone building a future. "You are doing all of this yourself?" she asked. "I hired help for the heavy lifting on the foundation and the frame raising, but yes, mostly it is just me. I know how I want it to be, and I am particular about the details." Clara climbed the temporary steps and walked through what would become the front door. Inside, she could envision how the spaces would flow together. The parlor would catch the morning light. The kitchen would be large enough for a family. The bedrooms upstairs would have views that made waking up a gift. "It is going to be beautiful," she said quietly. "It is going to be a home," Pete corrected. "Or at least, I hope it will be. A house is just wood and nails until someone makes it more than that." They walked back down, and Pete showed her the small cabin he had offered her. It was rough, filled with saddles and tools and supplies, but she could see past the clutter to the potential. It had a small stove, a window, and enough space for a bed and a few personal belongings. "I would have it cleaned out by tomorrow," Pete said. "I would build you a proper bed frame, and I have some furniture stored in the barn that belonged to my aunt. A dresser, a rocking chair, and a few other pieces. You would be welcome to anything you need." Clara looked at the mountains in the distance, at the half-built house that reached toward the sky, at this man who was offering her a lifeline without asking for anything improper in return. "I will need 3 days to think about it," she said. "That is fair." During those 3 days, Clara asked careful questions around Lincoln. She learned that Pete Richards had a reputation for honesty, that he paid his debts, that he stayed out of the range war politics, despite pressure from both sides. She learned that his uncle had been well respected, and that Pete had nursed the old man through his final illness with patience and tenderness. She learned that he went to church when he came to town, that he did not gamble or frequent the saloons, and that more than one young woman had set her cap at him without success. "He is waiting for the right one," Mrs. Patterson said. "A man like that, building what he is building, he knows what he wants. He will not settle for less." On the 3rd day, Clara sent word that she would accept the position, with the understanding that she would give it a trial period of 1 month, after which either party could end the arrangement with a week's notice. Pete arrived the next morning with the wagon cleaned and fitted with extra padding for the ride. He loaded her bags with care, paid Mrs. Patterson what Clara owed for her room, and helped Clara up onto the seat with a gentleness that felt like respect. The cabin was transformed. He had cleaned it until the wood floors gleamed, had built a bed frame from fresh pine, and had made it up with clean linens that smelled of sunshine. The dresser stood against one wall, a small mirror hung above it, and the rocking chair sat by the window. On the small table, he had left a jar of wildflowers and a note in careful handwriting. "Welcome home. Supper at sunset if you are inclined. Ring the bell if you need anything at all." Clara sat in the rocking chair and allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of having a place to be, of being wanted somewhere, even if only for her ability to cook and clean. She unpacked her few belongings, changed into her work dress, and explored her new surroundings. The barn held 3 horses, all well cared for and clearly accustomed to Pete's gentle handling. The chicken coop needed repairs but housed a dozen hens who regarded her with suspicious eyes. The small garden plot showed signs of ambition but lacked follow-through, with weeds threatening to overtake the few struggling vegetables. She found Pete working on the house, sweat soaking his shirt as he fitted boards together with focused intensity. He did not notice her approach until she was close enough to speak. "What do you need me to do first?" He nearly dropped his hammer. "I thought you would want to rest after the move." "I rested enough. If you want supper at sunset, I should start now." "I will need to know what supplies you have, where things are kept, and what you like to eat." Something shifted in his expression, a kind of wonder that made Clara feel seen in a way she had not experienced in years. "The root cellar is behind the line shack. I have beans, some dried beef, flour, cornmeal, coffee, and a few canned goods. It is not much. I have been living on whatever took the least time to prepare." He set down his hammer. "Let me show you where everything is." That first supper was simple, just beans and cornbread with coffee, but Pete ate like it was a feast. He cleaned his plate twice, complimented her cooking 3 times, and insisted on helping with the dishes despite her protests. "We need to establish some ground rules if this is going to work," Clara said as they worked side by side at the wash basin he had set up outside. "All right. I will cook 3 meals a day, keep the cabin and the common areas clean, manage the garden and the chickens, and help with any other household tasks that need doing. But I am not your servant. I expect to be treated with respect, and I expect clear communication about expectations." "Agreed. I will need supplies from town at least once a month. I will give you a list, and either you will take me with you or you will bring back exactly what I request." "I can do that. And if at any time you make me feel unsafe or uncomfortable, I will leave immediately, wages owed or not." Pete turned to face her fully. "Miss Thompson, I give you my word that I will conduct myself as a gentleman at all times. You will always be safe here. That is not a rule, that is a promise." The first week passed in a rhythm of work that felt both exhausting and satisfying. Clara woke before dawn to start breakfast, prepared lunch at midday, and had supper ready as the sun touched the horizon. In between, she worked in the garden, tended the chickens, and began the overwhelming task of organizing the chaos that passed for Pete's household supplies. She discovered he owned 3 hammers but no proper cooking pots, had nails in abundance but only 2 plates, and possessed a beautiful set of his aunt's china packed away in the barn while he ate off tin. Pete worked on the house with single-minded determination, but he also rode out each morning to check on his cattle, repaired fence lines, maintained water sources, and handled the 1,000 daily tasks that kept a ranch functioning. He was up before Clara each day and rarely stopped moving until darkness forced him inside. On Sunday, he asked if she would like to ride into town for church services. "I have not been to church in months," she admitted. "I am not sure I would be welcome." "Why would you not be welcome?" "A woman living alone on a ranch with a single man. People talk, Mr. Richards." "Let them talk. We know the truth of our arrangement, and God knows the truth of it. If you want to go to church, we will go to church." They went, and Clara felt the weight of stairs as they entered together. But Pete walked beside her with his head high, and when they took their seats, he introduced her to the people around them as his housekeeper with a tone that dared anyone to suggest otherwise. After the service, several women approached her with cautious friendliness, and Mrs. Patterson gave her an approving nod. On the ride home, Pete was quiet until they were almost back to the ranch. "Thank you for going with me," he said. "It has been lonely, eating by myself, working by myself, having no one to talk to at the end of the day. I know you are here to work, but I hope we can also be friends." "I would like that," Clara said, and meant it. As the weeks passed, their friendship deepened in small ways. Pete began joining her in the kitchen after supper, ostensibly to help with dishes but really to talk about his dreams for the ranch. Clara started bringing him lunch at the building site, partly to ensure he ate properly, but also because she enjoyed watching the house take shape. They discovered a shared love of books, and Pete brought back a small stack from town, insisting she had as much right to read them as he did. One evening in late August, a sudden thunderstorm rolled in with the fury that only summer storms could muster. Clara had been hanging laundry when the sky opened up, and she ran for the cabin, but Pete caught her arm and pulled her toward the main house instead. "The roof is on this section," he shouted over the thunder. "You will be drier here." They huddled in what would become the parlor, watching rain pour through the unfinished portions of the roof while lightning split the sky. Clara was soaked through, and Pete handed her a blanket he kept on site. "I am sorry," he said. "I should have warned you about how fast the storms come up out here. I grew up in Kansas. I know about storms." But she accepted the blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. They sat side by side on the floor, backs against the wall, listening to the rain drum against the completed portions of the roof. "Can I ask you something personal?" Pete said. "You can ask. I might not answer. Why did you really come west? It was not just for the teaching position, was it?" Clara was quiet for a long moment. "My aunt made it very clear that I was a burden she endured out of duty. When she died, I realized I had spent 8 years being grateful for scraps of affection, for being allowed to exist in the margins of someone else's life. The teaching position was an escape, a chance to build something of my own. When it fell through, I could have gone back east, could have found another family to take me in as a poor relation, but I was tired of being grateful for scraps." "You deserve more than scraps," Pete said quietly. "So do you. Why are you building all of this alone? Why not find a wife, start a family, have help with the work?" He was quiet for so long that Clara thought he would not answer. Then, "I loved a girl when I was 20, Sarah Jensen. She was beautiful and sweet, and I thought we would marry. But her father wanted better for her than a cowboy with nothing but dreams and a dying uncle's run-down ranch. He married her off to a banker in Santa Fe. I was angry for a long time, but eventually I realized he was right. I was not ready to offer anyone a real life. So I decided to build something first, to become the kind of man who could offer a woman a real home, a real future. I have been so focused on the building that I have not stopped to think about finding someone to share it with." "That is lonely," Clara said. "Yes, it is." He turned to look at her, and in the lightning flash, his eyes held something that made her breath catch. "But it has been less lonely since you came." The rain continued, and Clara became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the warmth radiating from him, of the way her heart had started beating faster. "Mr. Richards," she began. "Pete. Please call me Pete. Mr. Richards makes me feel like we are strangers, and we are not strangers anymore, are we? No, we are not strangers." Clara pulled the blanket tighter. "Pete, I need to be honest with you about something. When I took this position, it was purely practical. I needed work and you offered it. But somewhere in the last 6 weeks, this has become more than just a job to me. This place, this life, it feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has. And you feel like—" She stopped, afraid to finish the sentence. "Like what?" His voice was gentle. "Like someone I could care about if I let myself. But I am afraid that is not appropriate given our arrangement." Pete was silent for a heartbeat, then two. "Miss Thompson, Clara, if I am being honest, you have already become someone I care about deeply. I look forward to breakfast because I get to sit across from you. I work harder on this house because I want you to love it the way I do. I bring books from town because I want to know what makes you smile. This stopped being just an employment arrangement for me weeks ago." Lightning illuminated his face, and Clara saw hope and fear mixed in equal measure. "What are we going to do about that?" she whispered. "I suppose that depends on whether you could ever see yourself building a life here, not as my housekeeper, but as my partner. As my wife, eventually, if you could come to love me even half as much as I am coming to love you." Clara's heart felt too large for her chest. "You are coming to love me. I am already there, Clara. I have been fighting it because I did not want to make you uncomfortable, did not want to take advantage of you being dependent on me for work. But I cannot pretend anymore. I love the way you hum when you cook. I love how you talk to the chickens like they understand you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you make everything around you better just by being there. I love you, and I am terrified that I have ruined everything by saying so." Clara reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You have not ruined anything. You have made everything make sense. I love you too, Pete. I think I have been falling in love with you since that first day when you stood in Mrs. Patterson's boarding house and spoke to me like an equal instead of a charity case." He brought their joined hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, let people in town know my intentions are honorable. I want to finish this house and marry you in it, if you will have me. I want to build a life that is ours together, not mine with you as a worker in it." "I want that too," Clara said. "All of it." The storm passed, and they stayed in the unfinished house, talking until the stars appeared through the gaps in the roof. They talked about their childhoods, their fears, their hopes. They talked about what kind of life they wanted to build together, what values they would teach their eventual children, what they would plant in the garden next spring. When Pete finally walked Clara back to her cabin, he kissed her forehead with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. "Sleep well," he said. "Tomorrow, everything changes." And it did. Pete rode into Lincoln the next day and spoke with Reverend Morris about his intentions to marry Clara Thompson after a proper courtship. He told Mrs. Patterson, who laughed and said it was about time someone made an honest woman of her, though Clara was already as honest as they came. He even made a point of mentioning it to the shopkeepers and the townspeople, establishing publicly that Clara Thompson was to be his wife, not his kept woman. The town's reaction was mixed, but generally positive. A few gossiped, but most recognized that Pete Richards was a good man making an honest go of it, and that Clara had done nothing to be ashamed of. The women who had spoken to her at church became friendlier, offering advice on everything from pie recipes to how to handle a husband's stubborn streak. Back at the ranch, things shifted in subtle but significant ways. Pete still slept in the lined shack and Clara in her cabin, but they spent their evenings together, sitting on the porch Pete had just finished on the main house, talking and sometimes just being quiet together. He taught her to ride better, taking her out to see the full extent of the ranch. She taught him which herbs could be used for cooking and which for medicine, planting a small plot near the kitchen specifically for that purpose. The house progressed faster with both of them working on it. Clara could not do the heavy construction, but she could paint, could help measure and cut smaller pieces, could hold boards steady while Pete nailed them in place. Working side by side, they began to see how the house would look when finished, and each new completion felt like a promise being kept. In September, Pete asked Clara to ride into town with him for a special purpose. He took her to the small jeweler who worked out of a back room in the general store and told her to pick out a ring. "I want you to choose it," he said. "You are going to wear it for the rest of your life. It should be something you love." The selection was limited, but Clara's eye was drawn to a simple gold band with a small sapphire. "This one," she said. "It reminds me of the sky here." Pete bought it without hesitation, and he slipped it onto her finger right there in the store. "We will set a date when you are ready. I will not rush you." "December," Clara said. "I want to be married in our house and I want it finished first. Can we finish it by December?" "We can finish it by December if I have to work through every night," Pete promised. They did work through many nights, by lantern light, driven by the shared vision of starting their married life in a completed home. Pete hired 2 men from town to help with the final construction, and Clara coordinated everything with the precision of a general organizing troops. By late November, the house had walls, a roof, floors, and windows. The kitchen was functional, the bedrooms ready, the parlor and dining room waiting to be filled with life and laughter. Clara spent her evenings sewing curtains from fabric Pete brought from town. She arranged his aunt's furniture throughout the rooms, mixing it with a few new pieces Pete commissioned from the carpenter. She planted bulbs that would bloom in spring around the foundation. She made the house beautiful, but more than that, she made it feel like a home. Pete watched her work with something like awe in his eyes. "You have a gift for this," he said one evening as she adjusted the curtains in the parlor for the 3rd time. "For what?" "For making a place feel like it matters, like it is worth caring about. I built the structure, but you are giving it a soul." The wedding was set for December 15th. It would be small, just Reverend Morris, Mrs. Patterson, a few friends from town, and the 2 ranch hands who had helped with the construction. Clara made her own dress from cream-colored fabric that Pete insisted on buying from the finest stock in the general store. It was simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs that she had tatted herself. The night before the wedding, Pete walked Clara to her cabin one last time. "Tomorrow night you sleep in our house in our bed as my wife," he said. "I can hardly believe it is real." "It is real," Clara said, reaching up to touch his face. "You built us a house, Pete, a beautiful, strong house that will stand for generations. And I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making it a home worth living in." "You already have," he said, and kissed her with a passion tempered by tenderness, a promise of what was to come. The wedding day dawned clear and cold with snow threatening on the horizon. Mrs. Patterson arrived early to help Clara dress and arrange her hair. The older woman's eyes were suspiciously bright as she fastened the buttons on the back of the dress. "You are going to have a good life with that man," she said. "He looks at you like you hung the moon." "I look at him the same way," Clara admitted. The ceremony took place in the parlor of the new house, with afternoon light streaming through the windows. Pete wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. And when Clara appeared at the top of the stairs, his face transformed with such joy that several people in attendance had to wipe their eyes. Reverend Morris kept the ceremony simple and heartfelt. When it came time for the vows, Pete spoke as clearly and firmly, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. Clara's voice shook slightly, but she meant every word with her whole heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Morris said. "Pete, you may kiss your bride." And he did, thoroughly enough that someone in the small gathering cleared their throat pointedly. Pete just grinned and kissed Clara again, shorter this time but no less meaningful. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. Mrs. Patterson had brought a cake. The ranch hands contributed a roasted turkey, and various townspeople had sent along dishes of food. They ate and talked and laughed, and when the sun began to set, their guests tactfully took their leave. Alone in their house for the first time as husband and wife, Pete pulled Clara into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Richards. Welcome home, Mr. Richards." That night, they consummated their marriage in the bedroom Pete had built with such care. In the bed Clara had made up with fresh linens embroidered with their initials. It was tender and passionate and occasionally awkward in the way of first times, but they laughed through the awkwardness and held each other through the tenderness. And when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, they both felt like they had found the place they were meant to be. The winter passed in a haze of newlywed happiness. Pete taught Clara to track animals in the snow, and she taught him to cook more than just beans and cornbread. They read aloud to each other in the evenings, argued cheerfully about everything from politics to the best way to organize the pantry, and made love with increasing confidence and creativity. In February, during a brief warm spell, they planted a tree in the front yard, a cottonwood that Pete said would grow tall and provide shade for their children someday. Clara stood with her hand on her stomach, wondering but not yet certain about the new life she suspected was beginning there. By March, she was certain. She told Pete over breakfast on a morning when the first spring flowers were starting to poke through the snow. "I am going to have a baby," she said, and watched his face cycle through shock, joy, wonder, and fierce protectiveness in the span of seconds. "Are you well? Do you need anything? Should you be resting?" He was out of his chair and kneeling beside her before she could blink. "I am perfectly well and I am not fragile. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But yes, I am going to have a baby, our baby. Sometime in October, the doctor thinks." Pete laid his hand gently on her stomach, his eyes shining with tears he did not bother to hide. "We are going to be parents. We are going to be parents," Clara confirmed, and felt her own tears spill over. Pete was insufferably protective for the first few months, trying to prevent Clara from doing any work at all, until she finally sat him down and explained that she needed to keep busy, needed to feel useful, and that she would tell him if she needed help. "But what if something happens?" he asked, his fear naked on his face. "Then we will face it together." "But Pete, you cannot wrap me in cotton wool for 9 months. I need to live my life, prepare for this baby, keep our home running. Trust me to know my own limits." He did his best, though Clara often caught him watching her with worried eyes. She found it equal parts frustrating and endearing. As summer arrived, Clara began preparing in earnest for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric, knitted blankets and booties, and set up a cradle in their bedroom that Pete had made with painstaking care. The ranch hands, who had become friends over the months, brought by gifts: a hand-carved rattle, a small stuffed horse, a promise to teach the child to ride when the time came. Mrs. Patterson visited regularly, bringing advice and supplies and telling Clara she would be there for the birth if Clara wanted her. "I would like that very much," Clara said. "You have been like a mother to me, Mrs. Patterson. I would be honored to have you there." The older woman hugged her tightly. You have become like a daughter to me, child. Of course, I will be there." In August, a group of men rode onto the property, and Pete went out to meet them with a rifle in his hands and tension in his shoulders. Clara watched from the window, her heart pounding, one hand protectively over her swollen belly. But the men had not come for trouble. They were ranchers from the surrounding area, wanting to know if Pete would be interested in joining a cattlemen's association. They were forming to protect their interests and maintain peace in the region now that the worst of the range war violence had subsided. "We need men like you," their spokesman said. "Men who stay out of the fighting but still work hard and deal honest. We are trying to build something that lasts, not tear each other apart." Pete looked back at the house, at Clara watching from the window at the life they had built together. "I am interested," he said, "but I will not involve my family in any violence, and I will not compromise my principles." "That is exactly why we want you," the man said. Pete joined the association, and it proved to be a good decision. The combined resources meant better prices for their cattle, shared knowledge about ranching techniques, and a network of support when trouble arose. It also meant Clara had more visitors, wives of other ranchers who came to call and who became friends. She was no longer isolated, and the community that formed around them felt like the final piece of home falling into place. On October 12th, Clara woke Pete in the middle of the night. "It is time," she said, and he bolted upright with such speed he nearly fell out of bed. He rode to town for Mrs. Patterson and the doctor, while one of the ranch hands stayed with Clara. By the time they returned, Clara's pains were coming regularly, and she was trying to breathe through them the way Mrs. Patterson had taught her. The labor was long and difficult. Clara had known it would not be easy, but the reality exceeded her expectations. Pete stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement and love even when she snapped at him in her pain. Just after dawn, their son was born, red-faced and screaming with healthy lungs. Dr. Morrison placed the baby in Clara's arms, and she looked down at the tiny, perfect face with overwhelming love. "He is beautiful," Pete whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You are amazing. You are the strongest person I have ever known." They named him James, after Pete's uncle who had left him the ranch, and gave him the middle name Thomas, after Clara's father. Little James Richards entered the world already loved beyond measure, already part of something bigger than himself. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Pete proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with James when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, and talking to his son about the ranch and the land and the life they would build together. Clara watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. This gentle, patient man who had built them a house with his own hands now held their child with the same careful attention to detail, the same commitment to doing things right. When spring came and the cottonwood they had planted began to leaf out, they sat beneath it together, James sleeping peacefully in Clara's arms. "You remember what you said when we planted this tree?" Clara asked. "I said it would provide shade for our children someday. It is growing faster than I expected. Maybe it knew we needed it sooner rather than later." She shifted James slightly. "Pete, I want more of this. More children, more life, more building together. I want to fill this house with family and laughter and love. I want to grow old with you here, surrounded by the life we have created." Pete pulled her close, careful not to wake the baby. "That is all I have ever wanted. A house, a home, a family. You have given me all of it, Clara. You took the structure I built and turned it into something that matters. You made it a home." "We built it together," Clara said. "You built the house with your hands and I made it a home with mine, but we built our love together, and that is what will last forever." Over the next years, their family grew. A daughter, Sarah, was born in 1881, named after the girl Pete had once loved, because Clara said that first heartbreak had shaped him into the man she married, and she could honor that. Another son, Thomas, arrived in 1883. Each child was welcomed into the house Pete had built and the home Clara had made, into a family that valued hard work and kindness in equal measure. The ranch prospered under Pete's careful management and Clara's organizational skills. They added onto the house as the family grew, always maintaining the quality and care that had gone into the original structure. The cattle operation expanded, and Pete hired more help, creating jobs for young men who needed a chance the way he once had. Clara established a school in Lincoln for the children of ranchers who lived too far from town to attend regularly. She taught 3 days a week, bringing her own children with her, fulfilling the dream she had once had of making a difference through education. Pete supported her fully, adjusting his schedule to care for the children on the days she taught. The Cattlemen's Association grew in influence, and Pete became a respected voice in regional politics, though he never sought office. He was content to be a man who built things rather than tore them down, who solved problems through conversation rather than confrontation. In 1885, during a particularly harsh winter, they opened their home to 3 families whose houses had been destroyed in a fire. For 2 months, the house was filled with people, noise, and chaos, but also with gratitude and community. When the families finally moved into new homes, built with help from Pete and the other association members, they left with tears and promises to never forget the kindness they had been shown. "This is what home should be," Clara said as they waved goodbye to the last family. "A place that reaches out and shelters people, not just walls that keep the world away." Their children grew strong and capable. James inherited his father's careful attention to detail and his mother's love of learning. Sarah had Pete's gentleness and Clara's fierce independence. Thomas was all stubborn determination and joy, attacking life with enthusiasm that both delighted and terrified his parents. As the years passed, Pete and Clara's love deepened from the passionate intensity of new marriage into something richer and more complex. They knew each other's moods, finished each other's sentences, and could communicate with a glance across a crowded room. They still argued occasionally, usually about something minor that masked larger anxieties, but they had learned to fight fair and forgive quickly. On their 10th anniversary, Pete took Clara back to the spot where they had stood during that first thunderstorm, where they had admitted their love for each other. The house was long since finished, but he had maintained this one section exactly as it had been that night, a kind of shrine to the moment their lives had changed. "You remember what you asked me that night," he said. "I asked you what we were going to do about falling in love with each other. And I said I wanted to build a life with you, to finish this house and marry you in it. I have been thinking about that a lot lately, about how a house is just a structure, but you made it a home. You took everything I built and filled it with meaning. Our children, our friends, the people we have helped, all of that came from you." "It came from both of us," Clara corrected gently. "You built something worth filling, Pete. You created a foundation strong enough to support all the life we have packed into it. We are partners in this." "We always have been partners," Pete agreed. "In building, in loving, in everything that matters." They stood together, looking at the house they had built, the life they had created, the love they had nurtured. It was not perfect. There had been hard times, lean years when the cattle prices dropped, sick children who had frightened them half to death before recovering, and the daily struggles that came with any life. But it was theirs, built on honesty and respect and love that had only grown stronger with time. In 1890, Clara published a small book about homemaking on the frontier, filled with practical advice and stories from her own life. It sold modestly but steadily, and she received letters from women across the West thanking her for making them feel less alone in their struggles. She answered every letter personally, creating a network of correspondence that enriched her life immeasurably. Pete's hair began to gray at the temples, and he joked that it was from trying to keep up with 3 energetic children and a wife who had more ideas than any one ranch could contain. Clara developed laugh lines around her eyes from years of smiling, and she wore them as badges of honor. Their children began to grow up. James, at 17, showed an interest in veterinary medicine and announced his intention to pursue formal education back east. Pete was initially resistant, wanting his oldest son to stay and help run the ranch, but Clara reminded him that they had raised their children to think for themselves and follow their passions. "If we hold him back, he will resent us," she said. "If we let him go and he chooses to return, he will come back as a partner, not an obligation." Pete relented, and James left for school in the fall of 1896, promising to write often. He kept his promise, and his letters home were filled with enthusiasm for his studies and gratitude for parents who had supported his dreams. Sarah, at 15, was already showing signs of her mother's teaching abilities, helping the younger children in Clara's school and displaying patience that exceeded her years. She talked about wanting to expand the school to create a real education system in the region. Thomas, at 13, was his father's shadow, learning everything he could about running the ranch. He had a gift for working with cattle and horses, and Pete began to see a future where the ranch would continue long after he was gone. In 1898, during a particularly beautiful autumn, Clara's book gained unexpected attention when a prominent Eastern newspaper wrote a glowing review. Orders increased, and suddenly, Clara was receiving invitations to speak at ladies' societies and church groups throughout the territory. She accepted a few, always with Pete's full support and encouragement. He traveled with her when he could, proud to watch his wife speak with authority and grace about the life they had built together. During one such trip to Santa Fe, they had an evening to themselves in a hotel, a rare luxury. They dressed up for dinner, and Pete looked at Clara across the table with the same wonder he had felt when he first realized he loved her. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest man who ever lived. I am thinking that 20 years ago, I was building a house and hoping I might someday find someone to share it with, and now I am sitting in a fancy restaurant in Santa Fe with my beautiful, accomplished wife, watching her change the world in her own quiet way. I am hardly changing the world. You changed mine. That is the whole world to me." He reached across the table for her hand. "Clara, I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you for as long as I draw breath." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You romantic fool. You are going to make me cry in this nice restaurant. Then cry. I will still think you are beautiful." They returned home to find all 3 children had managed the ranch perfectly well in their absence, and the house was exactly as they had left it. The realization that their children were becoming independent was bittersweet, but it also felt like a triumph. They had raised capable, kind human beings who could stand on their own. As the new century approached, there was excitement in the air, a sense that the world was changing rapidly. New Mexico territory was making noises about statehood. Technology was advancing. The wild days of the range wars felt like ancient history. On New Year's Eve 1899, Pete and Clara gathered their children and a group of friends for a celebration at the ranch. As midnight approached, They went outside to ring in the new century under the vast New Mexico sky. "What do you think the next 100 years will bring?" Sarah asked. "Changes we cannot imagine," Clara said. "But some things will stay the same: family, love, home. Those things are eternal." James raised a glass. "To the house that Father built," Sarah continued. "To the home that Mother made," Thomas finished. "To the love they built together that will last forever." They all drank to that, and as the clock struck midnight, fireworks lit up the sky. Pete pulled Clara close and kissed her as the century turned, thinking about how far they had come from that desperate day when a young woman had stepped off a stagecoach with nothing but hope, and a letter promising a job that no longer existed. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what?" "For taking a chance on me, for seeing what this place could become, for building a life with me that exceeded every dream I ever had." "Thank you for building me a house strong enough to become a home," Clara replied, "for loving me every day, for being the kind of man our children can look up to, for being my partner in everything that matters." Around them, their children and friends celebrated the new century with joy and hope. But Pete and Clara stood in each other's arms, celebrating something more timeless, a love that had been built one day at a time, through hard work and honesty and unwavering commitment. The years continued to pass, bringing joys and sorrows in the natural rhythm of life. They lost Pete's closest friend from the Cattlemen's Association to a heart attack in 1902, and Clara miscarried a late-in-life pregnancy in 1903 that left them both grieving but grateful for the 3 healthy children they had. They celebrated James's graduation from veterinary school in 1904 and welcomed him home to establish a practice that served the entire region. In 1905, Sarah married a teacher she had met at a conference in Albuquerque, a kind young man named David Frost, who shared her passion for education. They built a house on land Pete and Clara gave them as a wedding present, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to establish their own life. Pete walked Sarah down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering her as a baby, as a toddler taking her first steps, as the young woman she had become. Thomas married in 1907, a rancher's daughter named Mary who proved to be as capable with cattle as he was. They moved into the line shack that Pete had once lived in, which had been expanded and improved over the years. Thomas took over more of the daily ranch operations, freeing Pete to spend more time on the business and administrative aspects he had grown to enjoy. By 1910, Pete and Clara had 4 grandchildren, with more on the way. The house that had once been built for a dream family now overflowed with actual family at holidays and gatherings. The sounds of children's laughter filled the rooms, and Clara often stood in the kitchen, surrounded by daughters-in-law and her own daughter, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. One spring morning in 1912, Clara woke to find Pete staring at her with a strange expression. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Nothing is wrong. I just realized that we have been married for 33 years and I still get excited when you wake up next to me. I still think you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. I still love you with everything I have." Clara snuggled closer to him. "I love you too, you sentimental fool. Now let me sleep another 10 minutes before we have to get up and be grandparents." He laughed and held her close, thinking about all the mornings they had woken up together, all the days they had worked side by side, all the nights they had fallen asleep in each other's arms. 33 years of marriage, and he still could not imagine life without her. As Clara drifted back to sleep, Pete looked around the bedroom they had shared for so long. The house had aged well, maintained with care and updated where necessary. The foundation he had built was still solid, the walls still strong. But it was Clara's touches that made it special. The curtains she had sewn and updated over the years, the photographs on the walls documenting their growing family, the quilt on the bed that she had pieced together from scraps of the children's old clothes. He had built a house. That was true. But Clara had made it a home, had filled it with love and laughter and meaning. And together, they had built something even more lasting, a love that had weathered every storm, that had grown deeper with every passing year, that would endure long after they were gone in the memories of their children and grandchildren. In 1915, New Mexico achieved statehood, and Pete and Clara celebrated with the rest of the territory. They had watched the transformation from wild frontier to settled state, had been part of that transformation through their work and their lives. "We are living history," James said during the celebration at the ranch. "We are just living," Clara corrected. "Doing our best, loving our family, trying to leave things a little better than we found them." But as she said it, she looked at Pete and saw the history they had made together written in the lines of his face, in the gray of his hair, in the love in his eyes that had never dimmed. They had started with nothing but hope and hard work, and they had built an empire of love that included children, grandchildren, friends, and community. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management and James's veterinary expertise. Sarah's school had grown to serve over 50 students, with 2 additional teachers working under her direction. The house Pete had built had expanded with additions and improvements, but retained its essential character: solid, honest, built to last. In 1918, the influenza epidemic that swept the nation touched their family when Thomas's wife Mary fell seriously ill. The entire family came together, with James using his medical knowledge and Clara nursing her daughter-in-law with fierce determination. Mary survived, though she was weakened for months afterward, and the scare reminded them all how fragile life could be. Pete and Clara celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1919 with a gathering that included over 100 people: children, grandchildren, friends, neighbors, and members of the community they had helped build. The celebration took place in and around the house, which had been decorated by their daughters and daughters-in-law with flowers and ribbons. Speeches were given, toasts were made, and through it all, Pete held Clara's hand and remembered the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate woman stepping off a stagecoach and a lonely man building a house in the wilderness, to this moment of abundance and love, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and their commitment to each other. "I have something to say," Pete announced when the formal toasts had finished. The crowd quieted. "40 years ago, I asked a woman I barely knew to take a chance on me. I offered her a job as a housekeeper, but what I really wanted was someone to share my life with. I was just too scared to say so at first. Clara Thompson, who became Clara Richards, took that chance. She came to a half-built house in the middle of nowhere and made it a home. She took a lonely cowboy and made him a husband, a father, a grandfather. She took my dreams and helped me build them into reality. Everything you see here, everything we have accomplished, all of it started with her saying yes to a stranger's offer of work. Clara, I have loved you every day of these 40 years, and I will love you every day I have left. You are my home." There was not a dry eye in the gathering. Clara stood, her own eyes streaming with tears, and hugged her husband. "You gave me a place to belong," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a purpose and a family. You built me a house and I made it a home, but the real home has always been us together. The love we built together, that is what lasts. That is what matters." They kissed to thunderous applause, and the celebration continued into the night, with dancing and music and joy. As the years passed, Pete and Clara settled into the rhythms of older age with grace. They moved more slowly, needed more rest, but their minds remained sharp and their love remained strong. They spent their days working in the garden Clara had expanded over the decades, reading together in the parlor, and spoiling their growing number of grandchildren. In 1925, they celebrated their 50th anniversary with a quieter gathering, just family. By now, they had 10 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, and the house rang with voices spanning 4 generations. James stood to give a toast. "My parents taught me that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every day. It is work and commitment and showing up even when it is hard. They have shown us what a marriage should look like, what a partnership should be. They built a house together, they built a home together, and they built a love that has lasted forever." To Pete and Clara Richards, the foundation of our family. Everyone drank to that, and Pete and Clara sat surrounded by the family they had created, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had lived. That night, alone in their room, they lay in bed talking quietly. "You have any regrets?" Clara asked. "Not a single one." I regret nothing. Every choice, every struggle, every joy, it has all been worth it because I lived it with you." Pete pulled her close. "I am 73 years old and I am still not ready for this to end. I want more mornings with you, more evenings on the porch, more grandchildren to spoil, more years of loving you." "Then we will have more years," Clara said firmly. "We have survived everything else. We will survive being old together too." And they did. They grew old with grace and humor, with occasional complaints about aching joints and failing eyesight, but always with love. They celebrated their 60th anniversary in 1935, an extraordinary achievement that was written up in the local newspaper as an inspiration to young couples. By then, Pete was 83 and Clara was 81. They had slowed considerably, but they still lived in the house Pete had built, still maintained their independence with help from family. Their minds were sharp, and their love was as strong as ever. On a warm October evening in 1936, they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. They held hands as they had done thousands of times before, in comfortable silence. "It is beautiful," Clara said. "It is," Pete agreed. "Though not as beautiful as you," she laughed, the sound still musical despite her age. "You are still full of nonsense after all these years." "It is not nonsense if it is true." They sat in silence for a while longer, then Clara spoke again. "Pete, if I go first, promise me you will not fall apart. Promise me you will keep living, keep loving our family, keep taking care of yourself. Do not talk like that. We have to talk about it sometime. We are old, Pete. We have lived a long, beautiful life together, but it will not last forever. I need to know you will be okay." Pete was quiet for a long moment. "I cannot imagine this world without you in it, but if that is what happens, I promise I will do my best. For you, for our family, I will do my best. That is all I ask." She squeezed his hand. "And if you go first, I promise the same, though I suspect I will be joining you shortly after. I cannot imagine wanting to stay in a world that does not have you in it." "We could go together," Pete suggested with a small smile. "Just drift off in our sleep, side by side." "That would be nice," Clara agreed. They did not go together, but they came close. In the spring of 1937, Pete suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. Clara nursed him with the same fierce determination she had brought to everything else in her life, and with James's medical help, Pete recovered more function than anyone expected. But he was diminished, frailer, and they both knew time was running short. In August, Clara's heart began to fail. She grew weaker day by day, and the family gathered, knowing the end was near. But Clara insisted on spending her final days in the bedroom she had shared with Pete for nearly 60 years, in the house they had built together. On August 22nd, with her family surrounding her and Pete holding her hand, Clara Richards passed peacefully from the world. Her last words were, "It was a beautiful life." Pete was devastated. For the first time in 60 years, he was alone, and the house felt empty despite being filled with family. But he had made a promise, and Pete Richards had never broken a promise in his life. He kept living, kept loving his family, kept taking care of himself as best he could. He lived for another year, and in that year, he made sure his affairs were in order, that the ranch would pass smoothly to Thomas, that each of his children and grandchildren knew how much he loved them. He told stories about Clara, keeping her memory alive, laughing at the funny moments and crying at the tender ones. On September 5, 1938, exactly 1 year and 14 days after Clara's death, Pete Richards died in his sleep, in the bed he had shared with his beloved wife. The doctors said it was heart failure, but the family knew better. He had died of a broken heart, of a life that felt incomplete without his other half. They buried him next to Clara in the cemetery, overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree that had grown from a cutting of the one they had planted together decades earlier. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates, and an inscription Pete had requested. He built a house, she made it a home, together they built a love that lasted forever. The ranch continued under Thomas's management, passing eventually to his children and then to his grandchildren. The house that Pete built still stood, maintained with love and care by generations of the family he and Clara had started. The school that Clara founded still operated, expanded and improved, but still serving the community she had loved. And the story of Pete and Clara Richards lived on, told to children and grandchildren, to couples just starting out and to those celebrating their own anniversaries. It became a legend of sorts in Lincoln, New Mexico, a reminder that true love was possible, that commitment and hard work could build something that lasted, that a house was just a structure until someone made it a home. Their great-great-grandchildren would stand in the house Pete built and see Clara's touches everywhere, would hear stories about how they met, how they fell in love, how they built a life together from nothing but hope and determination. And those descendants would understand that they were part of something larger than themselves, a legacy of love that had been built one day at a time, one choice at a time, one kiss and one shared meal and one sunset watched together at a time. The house still stood strong into the 21st century, preserved as a family homestead and a historical site. Visitors could walk through the rooms where Pete and Clara had lived and loved, could see the kitchen where Clara had cooked thousands of meals, the bedroom where they had slept side by side for 60 years, the porch where they had watched sunsets and planned their future. And if you listened closely on quiet evenings, some claimed you could still feel their presence, could sense the love that had soaked into the very walls of the house, the foundation of devotion that had been laid down so thoroughly that it could never truly fade. He built a house, strong and true, with his own hands and his own sweat and his own dreams. She made it a home, filling it with love and laughter and the thousand small touches that transformed structure into sanctuary. Together they built a love that lasted forever, not just in their own lives but in the lives of every person they touched, every child they raised, every grandchild they spoiled, every friend they helped. Their love became part of the land itself, woven into the fabric of Lincoln, New Mexico, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they chose each other, every single day, through joy and sorrow, through plenty and want, through youth and age. From a chance meeting born of desperation, and hope to a love that spanned more than 6 decades, Pete and Clara Richards proved that the greatest things in life were built not in moments but in lifetimes, not in grand gestures but in daily choices, not in perfection but in persistent, devoted, unwavering love. And so their story ended, not with a dramatic flourish but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a love well built, and a legacy that would endure long after the last person who knew them personally had passed from the earth. The house stood, the home remained, and the love they built together truly did last forever.